The badge and the betrayal. Raymond Pierce's footsteps echoed through the empty halls of the precinct as he gathered his belongings for the evening. After 23 years on the force and 5 as chief of police in the small town of Millbrook, he had developed a routine that brought him peace at the end of each grueling day. Luna, his 4-year-old German shepherd, waited patiently by his side, her gentle brown eyes following his every move. Luna had been more than just a service dog since the incident that left Raymond with a slight limp and recurring nightmares. She represented hope, healing, and a second chance at life after he'd nearly lost everything in a shootout 3 years ago. The brass plate on her collar caught the dim light of his office, Luna Pierce, service dog, a reminder of their unbreakable bond. "Ready for our walk, girl?" Raymond smiled as Luna's tail wagged in response. Their evening walks had become sacred, a time when he could shed the weight of his badge and simply exist as a man with his dog in the quiet suburbs of Millbrook. The autumn air carried a crisp chill as they made their way down Maple Street. Raymond had chosen to live in this neighborhood specifically for its peaceful atmosphere, away from the scrutiny that came with being one of the few black police chiefs in the state. Here, among the historical homes and well-maintained gardens, he found a semblance of normalcy. Luna trotted beside him, her leash loose in his hand. They had passed the old Wilson house when Raymond noticed the patrol car slowly cruising down the street. Something about its approach made the hair on the back of his neck stand up, an instinct honed by years of service. Officers Thomas Burke and James Morrison had been recent transfers from a larger department, their records clean but their attitudes problematic. Raymond had noted their resistance to his leadership, the subtle defiance in their eyes during briefings, but he'd hoped time would smooth those rough edges. The patrol car's spotlight suddenly illuminated them, and Luna pressed closer to Raymond's leg, sensing his tension. "Evening, officers," Raymond called out, keeping his voice steady despite the growing unease in his gut. "Well, what do we have here?" Burke's voice carried a dangerous edge as he stepped out of the car. "Someone walking a dangerous animal without proper restraints." Raymond maintained his composure, though his heart raced. "Officers, I'm Chief Pierce. Luna is my service dog, and she's properly licensed and leashed." Morrison emerged from the passenger side, his hand resting casually on his holster. "Chief or not, we've had complaints about aggressive dogs in the area. That animal looks mighty threatening to me." The absurdity of the situation might have been laughable if not for the palpable tension in the air. Luna, who had helped countless trauma victims and visited children's hospitals, being labeled as threatening? But Raymond recognized the real threat wasn't about his dog, it was about power, about making a statement. "Let's all stay calm," Raymond said, shifting slightly to keep Luna behind him. "There's clearly been a misunderstanding. I have Luna's documentation right here." He reached slowly for his phone, where he kept digital copies of all her paperwork. "Stop right there," Burke barked, drawing his weapon. "Keep your hands where we can see them." Luna let out a low whimper, picking up on the escalating situation. Raymond's mind raced through his options. He could pull rank, he could comply, he could call for backup. But before he could decide, Morrison had circled behind him. "That dog's getting aggressive," Morrison announced, though Luna had done nothing but stand protectively by Raymond's side. "We're going to have to take action." "She's not aggressive," Raymond insisted, his voice firm but controlled. "She's a trained service animal. Stand down, officers." "That's an order." But in their eyes, he saw what he had seen too many times before, the look of men who believed they were above the law, who saw his authority as an affront to their own perceived power. The next few moments would change everything in Millbrook, testing not just the bonds between police and community, but the very foundations of justice itself. Luna pressed against his leg, her warmth a reminder of everything they had overcome together, everything they stood to lose. As the streetlights cast long shadows across the pavement, Raymond Pierce knew this was more than a confrontation, it was a moment that would define not just his career, but the future of law enforcement in his town. Darkness at dusk. Time seemed to slow as Raymond watched Morrison circle closer to Luna, his hand gripping his weapon with dangerous intent. The autumn wind carried dead leaves across the pavement, each scraping sound amplifying the tension in the air. Years of training and experience told Raymond that this situation was rapidly spiraling beyond his control. "Last warning," Burke called out, his flashlight beam deliberately aimed to disorient. "Control your animal or we will." The threat in his voice was unmistakable, a cruel promise waiting to be fulfilled. Luna remained steady, her training evident in every controlled movement. She was doing exactly what she was supposed to do, staying close to Raymond, alert but not aggressive. Her gentle brown eyes darted between the officers, reading their body language just as she'd been trained to do. "Officers," Raymond tried one more time, his voice carrying the weight of his authority, "I am your superior officer, and I am ordering you to stand down. This is a gross violation of protocol." He could feel his phone in his pocket, knowing that if he could just reach it, he could call for backup. But any movement now could trigger a reaction he couldn't take back. Morrison's laugh cut through the night air like a knife. "Superior officer? Out here, after hours, you're just another civilian with an aggressive dog. And we all know how these situations tend to end, don't we?" The implication hung heavy in the air. Raymond had seen too many reports, reviewed too many cases where "I feared for my safety" became the blanket justification for unnecessary force. He'd spent years trying to change that culture from within, but now he found himself on the other side of that thin blue line. "Luna, stay," Raymond commanded softly, knowing their best chance was to remain calm. The dog's steady presence at his side was both a comfort and a source of mounting anxiety. He knew what these officers were capable of, had seen their type before, men who wore their badges as shields for their prejudices. Burke stepped closer, his boots scraping against the pavement. "You know, Chief," he spat the title like an insult, "we've been watching you. Walking around like you own this neighborhood, acting like you belong here. Maybe it's time someone reminded you of your place." Raymond's jaw tightened. He'd heard those words before, seen that look in countless faces over his career. But never had he felt so vulnerable, so aware of how quickly everything he'd built could be torn away. Luna sensed the shift in energy and let out a soft whine. It was barely audible, but Morrison seized on it immediately. "The dog's becoming aggressive," he shouted, taking an aggressive step forward. "She's not dash," Raymond began, but his words were cut short by the sudden movement of Burke's hand. Time compressed into a series of horrifying snapshots, the flash of metal in the streetlight, Luna's protective stance, the cold look in Morrison's eyes. The first shot shattered the peaceful night like a thunderclap. Luna yelped, a sound that would haunt Raymond's dreams forever. She stumbled but stayed standing, her loyalty keeping her at Raymond's side even as blood darkened her coat. "No!" Raymond's cry echoed down the empty street. He moved to shield Luna, but Morrison was faster. The second shot caught Luna in the chest, and this time she fell, her body going limp against Raymond's legs. The world tilted on its axis as Raymond dropped to his knees beside her. His hands, steady through countless crises, now trembled as they touched her cooling fur. Luna's eyes, still full of trust and love, looked up at him one last time before the light in them faded. "Guess she wasn't so well trained after all," Burke's voice came from somewhere above, distant and cruel. "Had to be done, for officer safety. You understand, don't you, Chief?" Raymond barely heard them. His world had narrowed to the still form of his companion, his partner, his friend. Luna's blood soaked into the knees of his pants as he cradled her head, memories flooding his mind, her playful bounds through the park, her gentle interactions with trauma victims at the station, her steady presence through his darkest nights. "You'll want to remember this moment," Morrison added, holstering his weapon with casual indifference. "Remember what happens when you forget your place in our town." The sound of their retreating footsteps mingled with the rustle of leaves and the distant sound of traffic. They left him there, kneeling in the street beside Luna's body, confident in their impunity. They didn't know that with each step they took, with each moment that passed, they were sealing their own fates. As the night grew colder around him, Raymond Pierce felt something shift inside his chest. The grief was there, raw and overwhelming, but beneath it burned something else, a determination that would shake the foundations of the Millbrook Police Department. They had taken Luna from him, thinking it would break him. Instead, they had unknowingly set in motion events that would expose the rot within their ranks and force a reckoning long overdue. Looking up at the star-filled sky, Raymond made a silent promise to Luna and to himself. This wouldn't be buried in paperwork or dismissed with a simple investigation. Justice would come, not just for Luna, but for every victim of abuse of power who had never had a voice. The badge he wore had always meant something to him: integrity, service, protection. Now it would become a tool for change, even if he had to tear down the entire system to rebuild it right. Behind the badge. The fluorescent lights of the Internal Affairs office cast harsh shadows across Detective Olivia Santos's desk as she reviewed the incident report from the previous night. 20 years in IA had hardened her to many things, but something about this case made her stomach turn. The victim report listed a service dog, but the owner's name made her sit up straight: Chief Raymond Pierce. This can't be right, she muttered, reaching for her phone. But before she could dial, her office door opened, and Deputy Commissioner Richard Walsh strode in, his face grim. "I assume you're looking at the Pierce file," Walsh said, closing the door behind him. "It's worse than what's in that report. We've got dashboard footage." Olivia's heart sank. As an internal affairs investigator, she'd seen countless cases of misconduct swept under the rug, but this was different. This was their own chief of police, targeted by his officers. "Show me," she demanded, and Walsh pulled out his tablet. The video was clear, despite the night setting. There was no aggression from Luna, no justification for what happened. Just two officers systematically destroying their chief's life in under 5 minutes. Officers Burke and Morrison, Walsh read from his notes. Both transferred here 6 months ago. Clean records, but there's something off about those transfers. Too clean, if you ask me. Olivia nodded, already pulling up their personnel files on her computer. "I want their complete histories. Every complaint, every commendation, every parking ticket they've written. Something led to this moment, and we're going to find it." Across town, Raymond sat in his home office, surrounded by photos of Luna. His dress uniform hung on the door, the badge catching morning light, a symbol that now felt heavy with betrayal. His phone hadn't stopped ringing since dawn, but he'd only answered one call: District Attorney Marcus Hamilton. "They're already building their defense," Hamilton had warned. Claiming they felt threatened, that the dog showed aggressive behavior. "Standard playbook, Ray. But they didn't know it was you, and that's going to be their undoing." Raymond's response had been quiet but firm: "I want everything, Marcus. Every case they've touched, every interaction they've had. This isn't just about Luna anymore." Now, as he reviewed Luna's service dog certifications and training records, a knock at his door broke his concentration. Through the peephole, he saw Detective Santos, her badge held up for inspection. "Chief Pierce," she said when he opened the door, her voice professional but sympathetic. "I'm heading the IA investigation. May I come in?" Raymond led her to his living room, where Luna's bed still lay in the corner, her favorite toy untouched. Olivia noticed his eyes lingering there and chose her next words carefully. "I've seen the footage," she began. "But I need to hear it from you. Not as a chief, but as a victim of police misconduct. We need to do this by the book." For the next hour, Raymond recounted every detail, his voice steady despite the pain evident in his eyes. Olivia recorded everything, but her mind was already racing ahead to the broader implications. "There's something else," she said finally, pulling out her tablet. "We've been digging into their backgrounds. Burke and Morrison didn't just happen to transfer here. They were part of a pattern. She showed him a map dotted with red markers. 6 departments in 3 years. Each time, they transfer just before complaints can stick. But they've left a trail of similar incidents behind them. Excessive force, racial profiling, abuse of power, all buried in administrative transfers. Raymond studied the pattern, his investigator's mind clicking into gear despite his grief. They're not just bad officers, he realized. They're systematic about it. Moving from department to department, targeting minorities, knowing the system will protect them. Exactly, Olivia confirmed. But this time they made a mistake. They targeted someone who knows how the system works, someone with the power to expose it. Outside, the sound of protests could be heard growing louder. News of Luna's killing had spread quickly, touching a nerve in a community already tense with similar incidents. But unlike other cases, this one had landed on the desk of someone who couldn't be intimidated or bought off. "We're going to need protection," Olivia said, glancing out the window at the gathering crowd. "Once we start pulling threads, a lot of people in power are going to get nervous." This goes beyond Burke and Morrison. Raymond nodded, standing to look out at the protesters. Among their signs, he saw Luna's photo alongside other victims of police violence. His personal tragedy had become a symbol of a larger fight. "Then let them get nervous," he said, his voice carrying the weight of conviction. Luna died because those officers believed they were untouchable, that the system would protect them like it always has. It's time to prove them wrong. Olivia watched him carefully, seeing not just a grieving pet owner but a man who had dedicated his life to law enforcement now prepared to expose its darkest corners. She pulled out a stack of files. "Then let's begin," she said, opening the first folder. "Because this isn't just about justice for Luna anymore. This is about changing the system that let it happen." Lines of justice. The conference room in the district attorney's office hummed with tension as Raymond Pierce laid out evidence across the polished table. 2 weeks had passed since Luna's death, and what had started as an investigation into 2 officers had uncovered a web of corruption that stretched across multiple departments. 7 departments in 3 states, Raymond explained, pointing to a timeline displayed on the wall. Burke and Morrison weren't just bad actors. They were symptoms of a larger disease. District Attorney Marcus Hamilton leaned forward, studying the pattern of transfers and incidents. Each move perfectly timed to avoid serious investigation. Someone high up has been protecting them. Detective Santos nodded, adding another file to the growing collection. "We've tracked their communications. They've got connections to a group called the Brotherhood, unofficial, of course, but powerful. They help problem officers move between departments, keep their records clean." The revelation had shaken the law enforcement community to its core. What happened to Luna had cracked open a door that many had worked hard to keep shut. But the investigation was taking its toll. Raymond hadn't slept properly in days, and the threats had started coming in, first subtle, then increasingly direct. "They tried to break into my house last night," Raymond announced, his voice steady despite the gravity of his words. The room fell silent. "Left a message too. Said they'd finish what they started." Marcus cursed under his breath. "We need to get you protection." "No," Raymond replied firmly. "That's exactly what they want, to make me hide, to show that they can still control the narrative. Luna died because of that kind of thinking. I won't dishonor her memory by backing down now." Olivia spread out a new set of documents. "We've identified at least 12 other incidents involving Burke and Morrison. 3 deaths ruled as justified use of force, multiple complaints of excessive force, all buried in bureaucratic red tape." The door opened, and Assistant DA Jennifer Reeves entered, her expression grim. "We've got a problem. Judge Sullivan just recused himself from the case. Says he has a conflict of interest." "More like he got a phone call," Marcus growled. They're trying to delay us, hope public interest dies down. But public interest was doing anything but dying down. Outside the building, protesters had maintained a constant presence. Luna's story had resonated far beyond Millbrook, becoming a rallying cry for police reform. Every day brought new revelations, new witnesses stepping forward. Raymond walked to the window, watching the crowds below. Among them, he saw people holding signs with Luna's photo, alongside pictures of other victims. His personal loss had become something larger, a catalyst for change that couldn't be stopped. "They're getting desperate," Olivia observed, joining him at the window. Burke and Morrison were spotted meeting with Captain Derek Rogers from their old department in Riverside. Same captain who approved their transfer here. "Track that meeting," Raymond ordered, turning back to the room. Rogers wouldn't risk coming here unless something big was at stake. "They're planning something." Jennifer pulled up surveillance photos on her tablet. "Already did. They met at a diner just outside town. Look who else was there." She zoomed in on a figure in the background, Police Commissioner William Hart from the state capitol. "The commissioner himself," Marcus whispered. "This goes higher than we thought." Raymond felt a cold certainty settle over him. That's why they're so scared. This isn't just about two officers anymore. We're looking at systematic corruption across multiple jurisdictions, all protected by the highest levels of law enforcement. The room grew quiet as the implications sank in. They weren't just fighting two corrupt officers, they were challenging an entire system designed to protect its own at any cost. "They'll come after all of us," Olivia warned. "Once we file these charges, there's no going back. They'll try to discredit us, maybe worse." Raymond picked up Luna's service dog badge, which he'd carried with him every day since her death. The metal was worn smooth from his fingers constantly touching it, seeking connection to her memory. "Good," he said firmly. "Let them come. Every move they make, every threat they send, just proves what we're fighting against. Luna died because they thought they were untouchable. It's time to show them they were wrong." Marcus stood, his decision made. "I'll call a grand jury. Jennifer, prepare the indictments, not just for Burke and Morrison, but for everyone involved in the cover-ups. Olivia, get your team ready. Once this starts, we'll need to move fast." "They'll try to paint this as a vendetta," Jennifer cautioned. "A grieving man abusing his power for revenge." Raymond shook his head, his voice steady with purpose. "This stopped being about revenge the moment we discovered how deep this goes. Luna's death exposed something corrupt at the heart of law enforcement. We have a duty to tear it out, root and branch." As they gathered their evidence, preparing for the battle ahead, Raymond felt Luna's presence more strongly than ever. She had died protecting him, loyal to the end. Now it was his turn to protect others, to ensure that no one else would suffer at the hands of those who abused their power. The sun was setting outside, casting long shadows across the conference room. Tomorrow, they would file charges that would shake the foundation of law enforcement in 3 states. The system that had protected corrupt officers for so long was about to face its greatest challenge, and Raymond Pierce would lead the charge, carrying Luna's memory as his shield and sword. Truth and reconciliation. The federal courthouse stood imposing against the gray morning sky as Raymond Pierce adjusted his tie, preparing to testify. 3 months had passed since Luna's death, and the case had grown far beyond what anyone had initially imagined. The grand jury indictments had named 28 officers across 7 departments, 4 police commissioners, and a network of administrators who had facilitated the corruption. "Are you ready?" Detective Santos asked, falling into step beside him as he climbed the courthouse steps. News cameras tracked their movement, but Raymond had stopped noticing them weeks ago. "I've been ready since the night they took her," he replied, clutching the small box in his pocket that contained Luna's service dog tags. They had become his talisman, a reminder of why he'd started this fight. Inside, the courtroom was packed. Burke and Morrison sat at the defense table, their arrogance finally cracked by the weight of evidence against them. Behind them, rows of other indicted officers waited their turn, their faces a mix of defiance and fear. U.S. Attorney Patricia Chen approached the podium, her voice clear and purposeful. The United States calls Chief Raymond Pierce to the stand. As Raymond took his oath, he saw faces in the gallery, community members, fellow officers who had chosen to stand with him, families of other victims who had found their voice through this case. His testimony would be about more than Luna now, it would be about breaking a cycle of abuse that had persisted for too long. Chief Pierce, Chen began, please tell the court about the night of October 15th. Raymond spoke for over 2 hours, detailing not just Luna's death but the subsequent investigation that had exposed decades of systematic corruption. He described the pattern of transfers, the hidden network that protected abusive officers, and the culture of silence that had allowed it to flourish. This case isn't just about what happened to Luna, he testified, his voice steady. It's about a system that convinced officers they were above the law, that they could act with impunity. Luna's death exposed that system, but she wasn't its first victim, just the one they couldn't hide. During cross-examination, the defense tried to paint him as a vengeful man abusing his power, but the evidence spoke for itself. The paper trail of covered-up incidents, the testimony of other victims, and the recorded conversations between corrupt officials had created an undeniable pattern. As the day's session ended, Raymond stepped out into the fading sunlight to find a crowd gathered on the courthouse steps. Among them stood Officer Janet Rivera, a rookie who had broken ranks to testify about the corruption she'd witnessed. "Chief," she called out, approaching with determination in her eyes. "The Academy class wants you to speak to them. They need to hear about how we make this right." Raymond nodded, understanding the weight of the request. The next generation of officers would need to be different, trained to see the badge as a responsibility rather than a shield from accountability. Later that evening, as Raymond sat in his office reviewing the day's proceedings, Detective Santos arrived with new files. "The Commissioner's office just released the reform proposals," she said, laying out the documents. "Mandatory body cameras, civilian review boards with real power, a database to track officer misconduct across jurisdictions. Everything we pushed for." "It's a start," Raymond replied, picking up a frame from his desk, a photo of Luna visiting children at the local hospital. "But policies alone won't fix this. We need to change the culture that made officers like Burke and Morrison think they could get away with murder." A knock at the door interrupted them. Marcus Hamilton entered, his expression satisfied. "The jury's going to deliver their verdict tomorrow. Chen says it's looking good, not just for Burke and Morrison, but for the whole network." Raymond stood, walking to the window. Below, he could see the memorial that the community had built outside the station, flowers, candles, and a bronze statue of a service dog standing guard. Luna's death had become a symbol of both tragedy and transformation. "You know," he said quietly, "when I first became a police officer, I believed the badge meant something pure, protect and serve. Somewhere along the way, too many forgot that. They turned it into a weapon instead of a shield." Olivia joined him at the window. "And now? Now we remind them. Every new officer, every policy change, every civilian oversight committee, it all comes back to that simple idea. The badge isn't power, it's responsibility." As darkness fell over the city, Raymond could feel a shift in the air. The verdict tomorrow would mark an end and a beginning. Burke and Morrison would face justice, along with their enablers, but the real work was just starting. Creating a new culture of accountability, rebuilding trust with the community, training officers to be guardians rather than warriors, these were the challenges ahead. He touched Luna's tags one last time, remembering her unwavering loyalty, her gentle spirit, her sacrifice that had sparked a movement for change. In the end, she had protected him one final time, not just from two corrupt officers, but from a system that had lost its way. "We're going to make it right, girl," he whispered to her memory. "Not just for you, but for everyone who needs protection from those sworn to protect them." Outside, the city lights twinkled like stars, and somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, a reminder that even in darkness, there was hope for a new day, a better way, and a justice system truly worthy of its name. The fight wasn't over, but the truth had finally come to light, and with it, the chance for real reconciliation and reform.